afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Chamber Talk Show. Today, we are discussing a topic that is very, very familiar. We're talking about abuse. And every 20 minutes, someone is abused in this country, and it's a pressing topic. So today, myself, I'm Dr. Tamika. I am joined by my co-hosts, Dr. Kanisha, Dr. April, and Dr. Tamara. And we got some expert advice going on today, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. We're also going to open it up for you as well if you want to ask questions or make some comments. So again, we appreciate you joining us. All right, ladies, thank you so much. My sisters, my homegirls, my smart sisters, let's get it. What do you guys think? Let's talk a little bit about abuse.
Okay, well, I will start off. There are so many forms of abuse, from the physical aspect, mental aspect, and a lot of times when we're talking about abusive relationships, I think people immediately think about romantic relationships and partnerships. But from my experience in healthcare, there are a lot of abusive relationships between parents and children, unfortunately. It's a very, very sad thing to see. And it impacts the people involved in that family unit, not just the abuser and the abusee, but unfortunately, there are others who have to witness that strained and negative, toxic relationship, which can have ongoing effects way beyond an incident, into from childhood into adulthood. And especially in these times of a pandemic where people are forced to be quarantined and isolated with their abuser, it's important that as a general public that we make sure that we are aware of people that we come in contact from work to school to the grocery store that may be in need of some assistance.
The sad thing about it, I'm actually going to make a quick correction. It's 20 people per minute, actually, that are impacted by some type of physical abuse. The thing about it, and you mentioned abuse, unfortunately, of course, between a mother and child, but men are impacted, men get
Not
abused.
just a mother and child, but also father and child, parents and children, and caretakers and children.
Absolutely. And let's touch on this. What is abuse? Let's talk to some of the therapists. What do you guys say abuse is? We know right now that it's power and it's control, but it takes on many forms. Let's
Well,
talk a little.
it's inflicting harm, number one. Abuse is inflicting harm on another person. So be it emotional abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse. So workplace abuse, like all these things are falling in the category of an abusive relationship, between another person who's really wanting to inflict harm on you or criticize. Like emotional abuse is one that I'll start with because it impacts, everyone to a certain extent. And I think, most people may have been a victim of emotional abuse at some point in their life. Emotional abuse is yelling, screaming at someone. It can be, manipulation. It could be rejection, rejecting someone's ideas or opinions. It can also be gaslighting, making you feel as if you are insane and that your feelings are, not valid. So all of those things can fall under emotional abuse.
Right. I agree. Oh, I'm hearing some feedback. Is that just me?
I don't hear it.
Oh, okay. So I
I
hear
just
some feedback on my end. So, I was listening to Dr. Kanisha and just thinking about the different kinds of abuse. I also kind of happy, and I'm not going to go into a whole political thing, but I think another very good example of abuse is just looking at just kind of how we as U.S. citizens have been treated, and the things that Dr. April just said about gaslighting, manipulation, things like that, are very good examples of abuse, of being like told and put in the position of like, okay, the things that I'm seeing, is that not real? And being, told by our almost former president that what we're experiencing is not real. And it makes us question. It's like, well, what is going on here? What does this really mean? And being And when you're put in those positions, we're just talking about kind of the mental health aspects of that. What comes from that is really being, when you question yourself, you start to, on a more significant level, anxiety can creep in, depression can creep in as well. It could really affect your self-esteem. So there's a lot of negative effects that come from those kinds of abusive actions.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the physical aspects of this, because we know that the stress leads to other things. It can lead to health issues. And then I'm going to back up and talk a little bit about, you mentioned self-esteem, Dr. Tamara. I see it early in the schools. I work in a high school. I've worked in a middle school before. And it starts, unfortunately, sometimes as early as dating relationships amongst students. So I want to talk about that in just a second, but Dr. Knissia, go ahead and just kind of elaborate a little bit more on the physical aspect.
Well, just like Dr. Tamara and even Dr. April had mentioned, the stresses and anxiety and depression and other mental manifestations, of course, take physical tolls on our bodies. Depression can have physical manifestations, even so much as pain. But you have increased probability of cardiovascular disease, even cancer. So all of the responses that your body takes to stress, even though it's emotional stress, has a great deal of physical manifestations. And a lot of people who deal with the anxiety and stress of whether it's physical or mental abuse will have some form of other manifestations, and also co-diagnosis when it comes to mental health disorders, from eating disorders to the depression and anxiety, to personality disorders, defense mechanisms that they develop to kind of cope with that toxic situation that they are in. In the abuse that I mentioned before between caretakers, parents, and their children, you will see actually stunting in their growth, them not being properly nourished, and getting nutrition can lead to other medical defects and even disease processes.
So we know no one is exempt, of course. Let me ask you, ladies, at some point in the past, have you guys experienced a relationship that was either physically abusive, emotionally abusive? I would like to know that.
Well, for
On
myself,
a larger scale,
oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead, April.
well, I was gonna say emotional abuse. I think, I've had in the past from a partner emotional abuse where the gaslighting took place. But being a therapist, you immediately recognize those signs. And I think for someone who's doing that to you, it's important for you to stand up and call them out on it. I have no problem with telling people how I feel. So me being able to address that with that person, hey, you're not going to talk to me like this. This is what I recognize, and this is what you're doing, and it's going to stop. You're not going to disrespect me. So I think being able to call the person out when they're doing those things and you're recognizing those signs is very important.
That can be, and you're right, Dr. April. And I will say this, is that sometimes it creeps up on you so subtly, though, because some of people who abuse and who have that behavior, it sometimes, some people say, okay, it's Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and it could just really come seemingly out of the blue. I typically think there are warning signs and things like that that typically come up. But there are times when, I could think of when I was in college, before I was a psychologist and professional and had a lot of relationship experience. I've definitely been manipulated, like kind of told, it's like, okay, I found, I've maybe like found a condom or something like that. And you're like, well, what is this? And you're asking for an explanation of it. And you're getting all of this kind of double speak and talk, and you're just like, oh, and you start to question yourself. It's kind of like, who are you going to believe, like me or your lying eyes? I've definitely been in that situation. And, I'm like, oh, well, what does this mean? Because when the person is like coming from a place of, they may be very good at that manipulation, and it may be very difficult to see initially?
So, my longest lasting abusive relationship was actually not a personal or romantic one. It was professionally. I was the only female minority junior partner in a large partnership of physicians. And it was definitely a lot of abuse. And I stayed in that situation. And not even just from my partners, but more so from the other physicians that I was forced to work with in that healthcare system, of literally day in and day out. And it was verbal abuse, it was physical abuse. I've had surgical instruments thrown at me. Um,
Mhm.
I was subject to abuse from my patients. I had a patient physically assault me in the emergency room and even spit on me. So, and I stayed because this was my livelihood. And I think it's important that now that we've talked about all of these different forms of abuse, is to really talk about some of the solutions. Because as a physician, my first concern is safety. Like, of course, there's a healing process and therapy that needs to take place, but it's hard to engage someone in those practices if they don't first feel safe. So I always try to make sure that I'm aware of resources that I can pass on. And this has actually happened where I came across a young lady and noticed her bruises just in passing, didn't know her, she didn't know me. But I immediately grabbed her phone. I said, "Can I hold your phone?" And I put several resources for housing, protection, and there are actually agencies outside of the police who will help um, those who are being abused in need, who are afraid to call the police because they believe that ultimately that could end up in their death.
Yeah.
So that's my first concern, because it's hard for someone to participate in their healing process and in the therapy if they don't feel safe. So like I said, I always make sure, and I try to tell people there's so many resources and um, out there that people just don't know about. Just keep a couple of numbers, a couple of websites in your memory that you never know when you will be ready and armed and have to share them, and you could potentially save someone's life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men experience it. As many as 3 million incidents a year. That's a lot. So we're talking mostly about physical right there. We talked a little bit about emotional. There's also sexual abuse. There's 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men. On an average, that's extremely a lot. So we'll talk about some things that people can do coming up. But let me share a quick story in the school system. Unfortunately, some of the young girls that get involved in abusive relationships, they feel validated, unfortunately. I've seen it where they felt as if, he loves me because he fights me, or he's jumping on me, or he's pulling my weave, or whatever happens. So how do we help the young girls now? What do we say to them to let them know that they are embarking upon some very dangerous territory?
Well, I think the first thing is for them to, understand their worth, and to set and create boundaries with people just in general, in your romantic relationships and your friendships or whatever, creating boundaries and letting people know what you will allow and what you want. People only do what you allow them to do, period, in any situation, in your work environment, in your, love relationships with your family. If you set stern boundaries with people and let them know that you mean business, this is something that I am not going to tolerate. And if they continue to inflict this type of behavior on you, you have a choice. You can remove yourself from the situation, walk away.
So Robert Thurgill has sent a message, and he's saying, ladies, please talk about the different types of abuse. And we kind of did that, and I'll give a rundown quickly. But he is asking the question of when a child sees abuse from the age of 2, and then as he gets older, he obviously gets involved in abuse in a relationship. It says it says that I have a nephew that's been abused verbally. It started at the age of 2 from his daddy, and now he can't stand his daddy. So of course, with that, it's leading to a lot of additional issues. So there's a lot to address there. Again, Mr. Thurgill, we said physical abuse, emotional, sexual, psychological, spiritual, verbal, financial. There are so many different types of abuse. We won't get an opportunity to go deeply or dive deeply into all of those today. We'll probably come back at another day and talk more about abuse, because it's huge. What do we say to someone who it started at such an early age, therapist? What happens at this point? They've seen it. So unfortunately, it's embedded in them. They may think this is normal.
That is very true. Because many times, and I would say in those kind of situations, because when you see that kind of abuse or have that kind of abuse inflicted upon you, that's trauma. And trauma needs to be addressed with a professional, because there is, it's one thing, and I loved April's kind of solutions about setting boundaries, all of that, I completely agree with. But sometimes being able to do that, you need to develop the skills of how to do that. And that will be with a professional, because when you've had that kind of trauma and seen that, you are maybe sometimes kind of gravitate towards that, because we go towards what is familiar many times. So if you've been in that kind of environment, many times you see either you become the abuser or you become the person who is being abused. And it's because something about that dynamic feels familiar, even though logically you understand that there is something very wrong about this. But the way the brain works when trauma happens is that is what happens. And so that's what I would definitely say to him, is that professional help is, as early as possible, is the key, because it can be very effective. Because some of the work I do around trauma survivors can be very healing for them, and that trauma needs to be healed before they can go on and have really productive relationships.
Some more comments are coming in. We have one that talks about men. A lot of times men are ashamed when they're abused. And how do you begin to counsel men who have gone through not just emotional damage, but physical damage?
One, I think importantly, before you can really start to do the work, you have to relate to someone, because nobody wants to feel alone. Like you gave some very interesting statistics when we started this talk. And I think it's very hard to give accurate statistics when it comes to men, but because of what you said, because of stereotypes and because of shaming, a lot of men don't come forward to actually report abuse or even acknowledge it, because they don't believe by society standards that these things happen to men, and they really, really do. But the most important thing you can let them know is that they are not alone. They're not the only man in the world that will be going through some form of abuse. There are men that go through emotional as well as physical and even financial abuse. And this is on so many levels, from the caregiver to relationships, to personal relationships, to especially when you start talking about minority men and Black men in a cycle of systemic racism, that's an institutionalized abusive relationship. So I think it's important that we break down these societal norms and increase awareness to let men know you're not the only one. There is no shame here. And you are going to help yourself and help so many others by dealing with the abuse at hand, healing from it, and creating a testimony.
Yeah. To piggyback off of what you said, I think people need to also understand that abuse doesn't equate love. Some people stay in these relationships because of the love. It's like, I really love that person, even though they're treating me like crap. And sometimes psychologically, you get to the point to where you're so used to being treated that way that you become numb to it. And you feel like if they're not treating you that way, they don't love you. That's their way of expressing love, by talking to you crazy or throwing a tantrum or trying to physically hurt you or things like that, people have to understand they have to move away from that. You're setting the precedent by allowing these things to continue to happen in your relationship. It doesn't matter how much you love that person, walk away. Remove yourself from the situation when you start to recognize the toxic behavior.
And before you go on, I just want to bring up one thing.
Okay.
We have to inform people, if you are on the receiving end of an abusive relationship, I don't care what you said, I don't care what you wore, I don't care where you were, I don't care what happened. It's not your fault.
Oh, that was
It
my
is
point.
not
Yeah.
by any means. Like I said, I don't care what you had on. I don't care the manner in which you walk. I don't care if you felt like you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't care if you ignored every red flag. At the end of the day, it is still not in any way your fault.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was just about to say that these behaviors are used to maintain power and control. Let me play the devil's advocate real quick. Maybe not so much physical abuse. Have any of you been the toxic person? Have any of you been the person?
Oh, yes.
that has
Yes.
been,
Yes. I confess.
Okay, I confess. So yeah, a lot to learn there. So somebody counsel me. Somebody counsel
Oh,
us.
I'm in therapy. Yes, you need therapy. Sis.
You are in therapy.
Therapy. And
Well,
then
tell
that's
us
why,
about your
but
experience.
honestly, that's why, in all jokes aside, that's why I can recognize it, because I had developed coping mechanisms from my professional employer abuse. They manifest in my personal relationships, where I keep walls up to keep control in my personal relationships. So yeah, I can admit that.
I will add to that. For me, it's a defense mechanism. If you say something that I don't like, if you do something that I don't like, then I will fight back, in that aspect. So I am working on that. I am not in therapy, probably should be in therapy, but just acting out of anger, which is another issue that we could tackle at a later time. If you make me mad, it's free game.
I've seen you work out. I'm a little scared.
That's my outlet. That actually helps me not to be emotional.
But you're strong. I've seen how much you can squat and
I am
bench
strong.
press.
That leads me to another point. Ladies, if they are being physically abused, what do you think? Do you feel like they need to go out and be able to defend themselves, or is that a stretch?
Well, I mean, that goes back to, you want them to feel safe. I'm not saying that they should then become the abuser, but I do believe that it's important that they give themselves a skill. If it is like defensive training or whatnot, if it makes them feel safe to give themselves a skill set that can protect themselves, it's a fine line to cross. I would prefer they were definitely in therapy first.
Right.
Dr. Tamara?
And sometimes just because like Kanisha said, it is a fine line, because of course I would want someone to be able to defend yourself, but because as we know, when you are trying to leave, that is always the most dangerous time, when you're trying to get out. But there's another part of me knowing how difficult it is to uncouple and to leave a relationship, is that, of course, I wouldn't want you to be in that situation anyway. So really, it's like, okay, you know how to defend yourself, but I wouldn't want you to have to do that anyway. I would want you to leave.
Okay. All right. So we're going to come to some practical strategies. We're running out of time. We're going to talk about some things that people can do. You guys know that I am a personal trainer. So when people are going through things, for me, I have many outlets that I use as therapy for self. We'll kind of touch on those briefly. But if you are the victim of abuse and you really need an outlet, I mean, if you like art, paint. If you like outdoors, you need to go hiking, running, jogging, walking. And I know it's easier said than done, but you've got to find something that you like to do that helps to ease your mind in conjunction with therapy. Because I think therapy is no longer as taboo as it used to be considered, especially in the African American community. So I think it's extremely important. If you like music, that's major for me. I like to dance. I dance a lot. I tell you ladies all the time, I dance in the bathroom. I feel like I'm one of Beyonce's dancers. Nobody's there but me. It's therapy for me. Music is therapy for me as well. So find an outlet, work out, get a trainer if you can. If not, like I said, find something that you can do. But before we go, give us some practical strategies, therapists, so that these people know what are my next steps if I am trying to exit these types of relationships. What can I do?
Well, number one, seek therapy. If you know yourself, so if you know that you're scared or whatever the case may be, seek professional help, seek therapy, talk to a therapist and come up with your strategy, your safety plan for how you can safely remove yourself from this situation. In the meantime, some of those things that you pointed out are really good, singing, dancing, exercising. I encourage all my clients to develop some type of exercise plan. Exercise is amazing for stress. So at least 15 minutes, and it doesn't even have to be a full 30 minutes, a full hour, at least 15 minutes of some type of exercise, cardio activity helps relieve stress. So I think, just really incorporating those things, diving into your hobbies, your talents, just to kind of take your mind off of all the stressors that you're going through while you plan your exit strategy.
And my quick point would be to tell someone, even if you don't tell them the extent of everything, part of a lot of abuse is isolation. And that is kind of the environment that an abuser likes to keep around the person that they're abusing, because many times their family, their friends don't know that they are an abusive person. So find someone that you trust, and family member, friends, or even it's a therapist, someone who knows what is going on, so you can have some support to be able to make that plan and to have some outlets. And so that would be my point, is just definitely tell someone what's going on. So if something significant were to happen, people aren't like looking up and like, well, how did this happen? I had no idea.
Okay. Kanisha?
And I want to point out that is a really big red flag. And I think it's important for people to realize, don't look over someone trying to isolate you from the people that are in your life. That's one of the biggest red flags when you're involved in a toxic relationship. They will try to create barriers between people that have been in your life and should be in your life and isolate you from other people. So if you are involved with someone that doesn't like you having friends, doesn't like you being in contact with your family, doesn't like you, being in social situations without them, red flag, red flag, red flag.
We are the greatest project that we will ever work on. So we got to invest in ourselves. We got to guard ourselves. We got to take care of ourselves. Inner happiness and mental wellness should be top priority for everyone. So although we hate to see these situations, we know they happen on a regular basis. However, like Dr. April said earlier, therapy, seek help, tell someone, make sure that people are aware of what's happening. Thank you, ladies, so much. I want to close. April is big on affirmations. If you can actually give us an affirmation as we get ready to close out. And if you guys have any questions for us or comments, you can leave. I know some people are actually commenting and asking questions and making statements. We'll get back to you, and we'll reply back to you as well. But we're going to get ready to close. And Dr. April, if you'll give us an affirmation.
Well, affirmation for today is I can overcome anything.
Okay. I can overcome anything, especially being a victim of physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the abuse is. So we want to thank you guys for joining us today, and we will be back soon. We will be presenting another show. We'll possibly have some other people on. We're looking to bring some guests on the show as well, as we continue to work, as we continue to use our expertise to help other people. So we appreciate you guys for joining us. My co-host, Dr. April, Tamara, Dr. Kanisha, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you, and you guys have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.